get started. Let me introduce Virginia Roper. We actually went to high school together, so we've known each other for a long, long time. She's in the Bay Area now, working for Autodesk. Does a lot of front-end work, works with Drupal, which we haven't done a lot with, so I thought it would be cool to have somebody to do that part of it. She also has a pretty artistic background, took a break from coding for 4 years to do watercoloring. So a little different from a lot of the engineer, hardcore coder types we've seen before. So yeah, it's just a fireside chat. I figured we would talk a little bit about kind of what she does and how she got there, a little bit about Drupal, and then just kind of see the perspective of somebody with sort of a more artsy background in this field. So, Virginia, thanks for coming.
Oh yeah, sure thing. That's interesting. So you've mostly had more technical people in that.
Yeah, we've had we've had people from all over the place. But yeah, talking about mapping for Uber and VC stuff and things like that. So.
Okay, though to be fair, what I do is still very technical. It just leans more on the artistic side, just because it's the front end and it touches up a lot of like CSS and just user experience design. So yeah.
You want to talk about Autodesk first, for those who don't know what Autodesk does?
Yeah, so Autodesk is a company. They're located all over the world, but they have a couple of offices here in the Bay Area. The main one is One Market, which is about 3 blocks down the street from here. And I work at the location at Pier 9, which is the pier that's like right beside the Exploratorium. And Pier 9 is actually really cool. That's where we have like this great big area with all these 3D printers and these workshops. And that's where a lot of our more, our 3D printing related projects are. And although Autodesk is mostly known for AutoCAD, but it's been acquiring a lot of different companies in the 3D area. And we also have Sketchbook, which is a popular product. Yeah.
So how'd you get started with them?
How did I get started with them? Well, it was actually, I've been with the company a little more than a year now. And it's not really a traditional, I applied to the company. It's more like I got sick of my last company, quit it, and wanted to take a half-year break. But my former lead at an older company, Dave, had recently joined Autodesk, and he needed a front-end person to be underneath him, and convinced me to leave my glorious state of unemployment after 2 months to join him. So actually it was really nice because my interview consisted of about a 20-minute chat with my then project manager, who was just like, making sure I fit okay, and then I was in, so it was kind of awesome.
You want to talk a little about kind of tools you use day-to-day basis, kind of what your day looks like, what your projects are?
Sure. It varies greatly just depending on what we're working on. When I first came on, I was actually brought on specifically to build this new Drupal project within what was then the consumer group for Autodesk. And the consumer group, which no longer exists, was the sort of umbrella to put all these different products related to consumers. So like it had Sketchbook, it had, I'm sure you've all been to Instructables.com. We've got a site called Tinkercad, a couple other sites. And the idea was that we've got all of these little tiny companies under the Autodesk umbrella, and each of them had their own website. And so each of them had to spend time away from building these really awesome 3D products in order to just maintain their website. And it was frustrating for people in marketing who wanted to just go in and make a change on a website. They just want to add a sentence or change a button color or something. And every change required a code push, which is really frustrating if you just want to go in and change some content. And so they made the decision to start using Drupal, which is really great for content management. And the goal was to bring all these different sites onto this Drupal platform that we were building. And so my main role is I'm the front-end lead, and I manage the front end of this Drupal platform. It's called the Flint platform, that we've been slowly bringing sites onto. We've got about 10 sites that are at some state of being brought on. Only 2 of them are live right now, though. So as for my day-to-day activities, I do a lot of stuff. I can show you what I was working on today as an immediate example. Some of it is just straight front-end development. I've got a file with some design standards for Autodesk Corporate that I'm integrating into our front-end theme. We've had just sort of a more consumer-friendly theme that we ported over from a website called circuits.io. But we're starting to add more corporate sites. Like, for example, we're going to have the Autodesk marketing site using our platform soon. So I've just been writing some SAS, which is amazing. If you're ever going to write CSS, I recommend doing SAS. Just bringing those pieces in there. So some of it's just straight coding. Some of what I do is Drupal configuration as well. Like, for example, this is a site that we're working on for Project Fractal, and we're working on really fleshing out the ability to add content to a website. So if you're a marketer, you can go in and add it really easily. And so a big thing that I just merged in recently is the ability to easily add different types of content. And so, for example, if you wanted to add new elements to this page, you could come in and choose these different types of content to add. And so I've sort of been building that out, and then building out in HTML, CSS, the theming for how these pieces look once they're actually on page. And then with this piece, I've also been writing, we have a wiki within Autodesk, and I've been just writing a lot of documentation for any sort of user, like if it's a designer or a developer or a marketer, to go in and read how the heck to use it to apply to their needs. Aside from that, this is completely not what a front-end developer usually does, but I've also been working in our build script because of we have a very custom implementation where when we push up to our we push up to our development server and then to our staging server, it compiles code from different repositories to build that environment. And so I've been going in and tweaking the part that builds out all SAS and compiles it into CSS. So I occasionally do some makefile editing as well. And that's most of my day. I have one person that works underneath me right now. And so some of what I do is occasional. I'll code review some of her work and pass on tasks to her. Right now she's focused on a couple of different sites. Although, if we go back about 2 months in time, I had 2 people working underneath me. We mostly bring on contractors to sort of flesh out the team depending on how many sites we're building for. And at that point, the difference from having 1 person to 2 people that you're managing is huge, and I was mostly doing review at that point. And it's nice to be writing code again, honestly. So that's about that.
So I haven't used Drupal before. Has anybody here used Drupal? One? So is it, have you done a little with Bootstrap? Is it kind of like Bootstrap, or is it more like content management? What kind of, generally, what does it do?
Well, it's a content management system. It's, I'd say it's equivalent to WordPress, but Drupal is a lot more powerful than WordPress. Like in terms of it's open source, and it runs on PHP. And it's in the same way that WordPress is really good for managing content on blog websites and brochure type websites where it's just a lot of basic content. Drupal is really good for managing very large complex websites where you can add different types of content and display those different types of content in different ways. And it's also considered a bit of a framework as well from the PHP end, because it's really easy to take basically anything written in core Drupal and write functions to extend it. So it makes it really easy to build on top of it. And one reason that we ended up choosing Drupal is that it has a really huge community, which means if you want to extend the site in any way, there's a good chance that somebody has already built a piece of code to do it, which is really useful. And because it's such a big community, if you ever have a question for how to do something, all you have to do is Google it or go on Drupal.org and look. There's a good chance that somebody's already had that question and answered it for you. So, yeah.
So for people interested in sort of job like yours or a business like yours, what do you think is the best way to get there? And what do you think are the important sort of tools to know and steps to take before you get there?
Best way to get there? Well, my situation is sort of unique because a lot of front-end developers do not touch back-end code at all. However, being a Drupal front-end developer, it's really hard to do front-end Drupal development without knowing a little bit of PHP. And so if you want to do front-end development and you want to do it in Drupal, PHP's got to be on your list. But for just general front-end development, it's not as necessary. For more general front-end development, I'd say the focus is much more on JavaScript and CSS. CSS is probably like the top thing you need to be really strong in, I'd say. Extension of that is Sass. Like at this point, I don't think, like at least from a corporate sites, I think they all basically are using preprocessors, or they should be using CSS preprocessors at least. And then, I mean, outside of working in a CMS, if you just want to do straight front end with within JavaScript frameworks like Node.js, you just need to be really, really strong in your JavaScript, especially in jQuery as well. So. And then some front-end people don't really get into visual design, but I think it makes you a much stronger front-end developer to have a good foundation in design, because it means that if somebody hands you a design, you need to build it out. It means you sort of have that visual language to know how to build it out and to be able to give feedback to the designer as well. It's sort of in the same way. I feel like if you're designing for a website, you should have at least a basic knowledge of HTML and CSS. Otherwise, it's not going to be very effective if you're trying to communicate with your developer and you're not really speaking the same language. And it really adds on to a project time, and it can make the code of a website a lot more convoluted than it could be and harder to maintain. So.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I'm the remote student.
Hello.
My name is Daniel. Let me turn on my video. There we go. I'm on your video. Hi. So, I was wondering, did you ever investigate any other preprocessors? We recently discovered Sass as well, and we're putting all of our education into Sass. But I noticed the Bootstrap was built on Less. Have you ever seen Less being used by any other companies, or maybe within Autodesk?
I've seen it used by other companies. I know when I was trying to figure out what to learn, I looked into the two, and it looked like Sass was being used a little bit more, which is why I decided to go with Sass. And interestingly enough, when I first came on the project, we decided to build out our initial base theme using Bootstrap with Sass. And so Bootstrap has a Sass implementation, and yeah, I just see Sass a lot more, and I suspect that within like 5 years, you're just not going to really see Less much anymore. So that's my theory, but.
And how about how about like CoffeeScript? Do you see that a lot? I mean, I know I've heard like a lot of good things about that. And,
let's see. At my last company, I worked with a guy who used CoffeeScript, and I looked a bit at some of the stuff that he was using. So it is used, but I've never personally worked with it. So, but it looked like pretty useful. That was when I was working on a project building out the front end of this a scraper that was scrape Amazon for just different content, and that was very useful to my understanding of building that scraper. So.
I have a quick question, and then we'll turn it over to everybody else. What do you see coming for the future? We're in school for a little while longer yet, but what do you see, being big, being important, being like dominant themes in the next 2, 3, 5 years?
Well, I guess from my perspective within Autodesk, I know that we're moving away from sort of a product-based company to a subscription-based company. So I definitely see more things being subscriptions in the future. Looking at my own project, I see like within companies getting away from having lots of microsites within a company to like larger umbrellas, just managing those sites. I'd say I see a lot more JavaScript-based sites, but that's been happening for several years now, so that's not really a prediction for the future so much.
Or very safe one, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Cool. Questions from the audience, here or remote? Is there another stick one? Sorry, Ted. I saw you had a list, so I think, oh, I'm here.
So you said that basically you are importing all this company website under one Drupal application, right? And I wanted to know, like, so are you working with this, like the designer and developer who developed this website to integrate it into your Drupal application? Is it what you're doing?
Sort of. It's complicated. Well, first, we're not really bringing in all of the sites at Autodesk. It's, well, we started off with consumer sites, and now we're actually working with a couple of different manufacturing-related sites. And it's sort of this, it's confusing. Because within Autodesk, there's also like a separate Adobe group that builds Adobe sites. And we have, like right now, I have like a stack of files that one person sent to me that I am working on implementing for a site that we're building out right now. But then they have a separate contract developer that's also working on building out pieces with separate design that he has. And so I figure it's we'll see what it looks like in 1 month and see who gets overruled. It's sort of complicated because you know, we have like people like deep within Autodesk that are setting corporate standards, but then because we've acquired all these different companies, they have, you know, like their own designers who have their own standards, and so I think there's some push and pull. And my current position is to sort of get stuck in the middle. And so it's usually handled with a lot of communication and a lot of things launching a little later than they should because somebody wants to tweak something that they thought was going to look a different way.
Yeah. Now, Autodesk is huge and international, and you've worked with some smaller companies before that, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what it's like to, I mean, have you ever done like startup size or that small?
Yes.
Okay, so do you want to talk about what it's like kind of living the startup life versus working for a huge multinational?
Sure. Yeah, actually, this is my biggest, Autodesk is about 8,000 employees plus all of its contractors, and that's the biggest company that I've worked for since college, I think. Since, to go back in my history a bit, my company before this was a startup that was involved in publishing for self-published authors, and we maxed out at about 14 employees. And then before that, I worked for a marketing company. We maxed out at about 11 employees. So, in terms of how different it is, well, I mean, because each company that I've been at has been different in its own way. Like the last company I was at, it was just managing this one website that had like this huge amount of content, because for a while they were pulling in, like they were just a bookstore before they started going the self-publishing route. And so we were managing listings for like every book that we could pull in from Barnes & Noble and all this other stuff. So it was a huge site, but it was a tiny company, and what made it different was the fact that the management changed what the business model was about every 3 months, which is one reason I'm not there anymore. And before that, I was working for the marketing company, and that was definitely working with much smaller websites where more of them made sense to be on WordPress than Drupal, because this is often like just these tiny technology companies that just needed a site with some content, a blog, contact form, some documentation. And it was still a little unmanageable because we would have like 6 or 7 projects going at once. And I was the only developer there. And there was a point where I was the only developer, but I had 4 different project managers telling me what to do, which was really fun. Honestly, if anybody has a chance to work for a marketing agency, you will learn a lot, but you will not want to stay there more than 2 years because you will be at risk of getting burnout. In terms of working at a larger company, it's definitely interesting the fact that there are actually standards that I have to follow, and it means you don't have quite as much freedom, but it's also kind of nice because you have, you know, these set pieces to work from. And then of course sort of just the benefits of working for a larger company of, oh hey, 401k, that's nice. So, yeah.
Which brings me to the next question we all want to know. No, they do not have available internships for us. I already checked.
Yeah, sorry.
Other questions?
So I was curious, it sounded like you started out more in design, or you had a design background. And is that the way you went, and then you went into code, or?
Yeah, it was kind of a mix. So I first realized I wanted to make websites when I was in high school, and I built my first website, and I thought those would be fun. And then in college, when I was in college, they didn't have a track for doing web design. So I sort of patchworked my own together, which is how I got a major in illustration, and then a minor in computer science. And my computer science courses consisted of writing Java and assembly language, which is really useful. And then after that, my first job out of college was actually doing web design. But when I got that job, it was also in 2002. And that's when being a web designer meant that you were also writing code. Back then, being a designer meant also being a front-end developer, because there was no distinction between the two. And at that company, they were also like, oh, we're building this site with a shopping cart. We need you to learn Perl. Okay. And I also did all the graphics as well. And at some point, I sort of hit a point though, like after that job, that was when I went and did watercolor, because I sort of hit a point where, I guess in the progression of the web industry, sort of the roles started splitting out, and I go to interviews and they'd ask me, so are you a designer or a developer? Like, they expected your focus to either be, you know, creating graphics, doing visuals, or being a coder. Like, they couldn't, it frustrated me because I perceived myself as both. And when I ended up, you know, getting back into doing development, that was still there, but I think it's been going away more and more, since people are finally realizing that it's in, like, doing front-end work, it's important to have strengths in both areas. So, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I
Okay.
think so. It gives you an idea. So now, I guess like it sounds to me like some of what you do is like designing the templates for the content. Do you feel like you still get to do design, or you're mostly like implementing other people's design with code?
It's sort of a mix. It's not hugely creative, but there's a lot of interface design that I do. Like, for example, grab this again real quick. Like, I don't do that much implementation of site design at this point. It's more like I built the structure to allow other people to implement these site designs, but, okay, there we go.
Check your timed out.
Oh.
Just-
Okay.
Actually, we can turn this.
Okay. We good?
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess in building these components out, I have done some layout tweaks just to, I guess most of the design I do is focused on organizational design. So when a user comes in here, they can have an idea of where they are in the hierarchy. So yeah, it's not like I'm creating a bunch of graphics or anything. It's more like I make the decision of I need to pad out this element in order to make it stack above this element, and it needs to be this size larger and this font width in order to have a proper hierarchy. So
It still sounds like design.
yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because that's something I used to think about, because I remember when I first got interested in web design. Well, web development, we've been thinking web development, but like back when we first started getting into HTML and CSS, it was definitely like you made the graphics like you described, and then like you put it together too. But now it's like, if I think about being a web developer, I'm not sure like how much of a hand I have in doing the design. So would you say that like that's the case for most jobs nowadays, or, I mean, I'm not sure because you're mostly working from your position, but like, do you have a feeling about like how much design you get to do as a web developer in general?
Well, for your average web developer, you don't do any design.
Yeah.
But Yeah, in terms of like graphics design, I think it's, I don't know, like, you know, look at websites like 10 years ago versus now, and it was totally like you design this layout and you can do a bunch of crazy graphics and you hand it off to somebody else. And because I think they're becoming more closely integrated, the role of like creating the layout and the role of implementing the layout, it does mean things might not be as, I don't know, doing super interesting graphics, but I think it also depends on the industry that you're in and what you're designing for. Like, you know, if you're working on a site that has a lot of interactivity for it, if it's for, you know, something more consumer-based, like if it's a kid's website or, you know, something like that, I think there's a lot of opportunity for interesting design. And yeah, I think it's a difficult question. Part of the problem is I'm not really in the design industry at this point. I'm focused more on, yeah, component and that sort of design. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about like the creativity of front-end development because I think when we were thinking first about like being part of web design and like being interested in front-end, I think we also had the notion, well, front-end is like the appearance of the website. So like that's what's creative. And then now we know that a little bit more, and it's like what you describe of like more of an organization and like coding the elements more than like design and like deciding how it looks. I was curious to know if you find it that it is like creatively fulfilling, like if that was like your original draw to this career.
I think
or fulfilling in other ways would be interesting too.
On some days it is creatively fulfilling, and on some days it's technologically fulfilling. I think it's fulfilling mostly from the standpoint of somebody who finds it very satisfying to solve problems. And I think you solve problems in a lot of different ways doing front-end development. Some of it is just, you know, implementing a chunk of code. Like for example, we have a piece that we're building that is connecting to a new system that Autodesk has, which basically is a system that we can connect to pull in data about like some like different 3D models that users create. And so, you know, I've had to deal with different problems for like how to take all of these attributes being pulled in from these different models and how to render them properly. But then there's also like more design/experience elements. Like if I'm a user and I come to the site and I need to go through like this process of registering for a site, or you know, filling out some other form, or moving around the site, like solving the problem of like who are the users that are coming and how I can make them have like the right experience. And you know, some of it is making it feel really friendly as well. So yeah.
That answers my question. So I do have other questions, although I feel like I'm losing them. One of them was, so you mentioned that you work with Drupal mostly now, and I was wondering if that was a skill set that you had coming in because your project manager at the time was looking for that, or is it something that you just knew you were like someone who was available and that you would be able to learn it on the job when you first came into the role?
I've been using Drupal for almost 10 years at this point. Although I first used it in 2007, and it was actually for my 10-year high school reunion website. And then I forgot about it for a couple of years, and then I re-remembered it when I was working at the marketing company when we had a project, and I was like, you know what, I remember this Drupal thing, and I think it would be good for that. And so I first started using it regularly there, and then in my previous company, the publishing company, they only used Drupal, and so that's when I sort of really ramped up my Drupal skills. And that's the company where I worked with my current lead, Dave. And because we sort of forged our relationship there and he knew some of the stuff I could do with Drupal, that's why he decided to reach out to me at, like when he came on Autodesk to see if I wanted to come over there with him and work with him. So, yeah.
And is that something he was looking for specifically, like Drupal? or was it something that after you came there and you thought it would be a good fit for what he was trying to do?
He was specific, like it was decided that the project was going to be done in Drupal before I came on, and so he specifically wanted me for my Drupal skills. So.
Did we already get to see, I know you were showing something with Drupal, but was that the thing you were talking about with the different, like, the umbrella website with the, like, sites underneath it?
Yeah.
That was the thing. Cool. Was that the, like, that's not what the people, the clients would see though, it's more like what the developers or the people
Actually,
using?
I can show you real quick.
That'd be cool.
So to give you an idea of. Okay. So yeah, I've got a couple different sites. I'll just use the Tinkercad site since this one is actually a little bit further developed. I'm currently logged in as an admin user, and in our specific Drupal setup, we're on Drupal 7 and we have this admin toolbar enabled. And when you're logged in as an admin, you have this up the top and you just have this set of admin links, and each of these you have different things you can do. And then there's also the separate side of the site that's just at /admin, and that's where all like the admin specific things are. But when you're logged as an admin, no matter what page you're on the site, they'll have that toolbar at the top. And so, yeah, so within here, you've got the ability to manage your existing content that you have on the site, as well as add new types of content. This current site has a couple of different content types here. And then let's see, underneath structure, this is just how to manage different types of structure, like all content is made of content types, and we've got a couple other things here, like menus, taxonomy, which if you want to add like a list of categories to tag a blog post with, for example, some other things. Under appearance is where you manage the theme for your site. I was in charge of building the consumer base theme, and then every site that we add on gets its own sub-theme where it can add its own CSS, HTML, PHP to override this base theme. And so that's enabled for this site. There's also a section called people. And by the way, this menu set is the default menu set for any Drupal 7 website. And so under people is where you just manage your different users that you have on the site. And there's also an area to manage permissions, depending on what you want different users to be able to access. You can enable or disable things. That's one way that Drupal is also really powerful. You can make, a lot of different user roles. So if you have one user where you only want them to be able to write blog posts, you can do that. But if you have another user where you want them to manage more content or manage other users, then you can give them those additional permissions. And then modules is, Drupal's power is in modules. Those are just basically the pieces you can add to do a bunch of different things. And we have a lot of modules, some of them that are turned on. And then configuration is just anything having to do with configuration of your website. Some of it is just generic stuff like site information, like your site name and email address, and then some of it is a little more technical, like cache page management. And some of these are elements that are added because we added certain modules as well. And then we have a reports area, and that's useful for, well, there's usually error reporting in here, but I think I have it turned off right now. But it can be really useful to come in here to check out like errors your site's having and just other reports. So yeah, that's sort of what this Drupal backend looks like.
I didn't remember my question, so I don't know how to phrase it though. And then I'll turn it over back to whoever else wants to ask the question. But I think my question was relating back to the whole like creativity of front-end development thing. So one of the things that I felt when doing front-end is like, or one of the things that I encountered is like the necessity of knowing all of these like standards for CSS, like all the little finicky rules of like okay, if it's a browser older than this, then you have to like apply this special fix, and like there are all these little things to like track in CSS and HTML settings. And I was wondering if like that kind of kills some of the joy of like coding in front-end development for you, or if it's like something that you find a way to manage, or if it's not even like something you find that bothers you, the tedium of keeping up with those little things.
Well, first I'd say it depends on the project, since I've worked on sites where they require something to work in Internet Explorer 6. However, what I currently work on, they only need it to work in Internet Explorer 11 and afterwards, which makes it really nice. And so I think for each project, you just find out what the requirements are for that project, and you go with that. Also, writing SAS, there are mixins that you can use that will, like for example, if you wanted to add like a border radius, there is like a little extension that you can use, and you put in your border radius, and when it compiles it into CSS, it automatically prints out the proper extension for each of the different browsers, so you don't have to worry about it as much, which is incredibly useful. I mean, some of it is just a learning process. Like the more you use CSS, the more you know what you can and what you can't do. So yeah, I don't think it does it at all, really. So, yeah.
How much of a role does accessibility play in what you do? We just wrapped up a big accessibility project a couple weeks ago, just trying to make sure people with different, user experiences could still see our sites and hear our sites and, read our sites. Is that something that you deal with, or is that sort of a more low-level concern?
No, it is. Actually, that it kind of bridges from your question, because I realize one important thing to do is to have progressive enhancement, and that's sort of to make sure, if somebody is viewing your site in IE6, that maybe they don't have the beautiful experience that somebody in the latest version of Chrome has, but they still have an experience that's usable. Like make sure the site isn't jacked. So, and in terms of accessibility, when I was in college, I had an internship with the Partnership for People with Disabilities, and that's when I first learned about Section 508 and just accessibility standards. And because of that internship, it's sort of always on my mind when I build things. Drupal 7 has a lot of defaults in place that, when writing code using Drupal specific functions, it will automatically generate some of those pieces for you. Like for example, if you add a menu in Drupal, it'll automatically add elements to allow that menu to be accessible. And I mean, some of it is just things you need to learn for when writing CSS. Like, don't put anything that somebody needs to be able to read into an image. You need to always have alt text to be able to understand it. And one thing that makes accessibility a little easier is some of the same things that make a site accessible also makes it very SEO friendly. And so as long as you know really strong like SEO standards, then you automatically know a bunch of accessibility standards as well.
So, okay, let me think about what my question was. Maybe I'll catch it back later. But I heard that like you self-taught yourself, and you kind of described it to us. But you went to college learning some programming, but not specifically, I guess, like web development. So how was that process of like teaching yourself, I guess, HTML and CSS? And I guess like what would you recommend for people who might be kind of like learning? I mean, we go through blocks where they introduce concepts for us, but they also leave a lot of room for us to explore ourselves. So what are your tips for like learning web development and stuff like that?
Well, admittedly, a lot of learning I did was on-the-job learning. Like I mentioned, my first position out of high school that I picked up Perl because they told me learn Perl. But in terms of learning on my own, I've always had like different personal projects that like just websites that I wanted to build, and I would use that as an opportunity to learn new things. So when I quit my job doing the watercolor painting, which I quit because I missed building websites, and I wasn't painting my own watercolors, I was painting reproductions of other people's watercolors, which after 4 years is not very satisfying. So what I actually did was I saved up a chunk of money so that I could just take some time off, and I had an idea for a website to build in PHP. And up until then, I had done like a little PHP on the side, mostly because I was really into building internet quizzes, which taught me just basic PHP for form submission. But I had an idea for building a creative website for people to use, where like people could go and create crossword puzzles and create word searches and create Mad Libs and create choose your own adventure stories. And so based on that and a whole lot of Googling to figure out how to write code in the ways I needed to, I built that website, which was a huge foundation for me learning PHP. And it also, after sort of being out of doing a lot of development for several years, it helped me catch up to what were then like the most recent standards in like HTML and CSS. So yeah, I totally recommend just figuring out a website that you think, or an application or whatever that you think would be interesting to build, that you could, you know, break down into digestible pieces, and going about it that way. Because I don't know, I think that's a lot more effective than tutorials, just because, you know, you're building something for yourself that you can say, this is my idea that I thought of, and I think that it motivates you a bit more, and that's like something cool you can put on your resume too. So yeah.
That's cool, because I think we do, we have a bit of that coming up. We have a 7th-month project that will be coming up, and basically it's a web product or web application, so hopefully we'll be learning some of that too. But how do you feel about, like, for kind of like along the lines of a coding or learning exercise, like, is it better to try to do it from scratch without like relying on anything like WordPress or Drupal, or do you think it makes more sense to go ahead and use those tools since they're more likely to be like what you're using in an actual job?
I personally think it makes sense to use those tools, because once you start customizing it, you're going to have to dig into the code anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So like Drupal, you know, it's not exactly like plug it in and everything works. Like, you're going to plug it in and it's going to look different from how you want it to look. It's not going to have the fields that you're going to want, and they're going to be in strange places. And so no matter what, you're still going to have to, you know, dig into the code and manipulate things. So, and it's also the fact that, I don't know, I think it's very common to use these tools, and not that many people are starting from scratch. You're either starting with Drupal, or you're starting with like JavaScript framework or a CSS framework. So, I mean, you can still learn a lot from starting from scratch, but I think it's perfectly acceptable and totally encouraged me to, you know, jump into Drupal in a similar type of frameworks. So.
Cool. Other questions? Joe.
What are your thoughts and opinions on freelancing or ad agencies?
Well, I mentioned earlier me working for an ad agency. It's a great way to learn a lot, and you just have to be really careful, because basically everybody I know who's worked for an ad agency has gotten burnt out easily, because, you know, they're about, you know, working very rapidly, and it's definitely not the sort of place where you can be like, you know, I want to perfect this a little. Can we wait a week before launching? Since deadlines are really important in ad agencies, but you learn a lot really fast. And so if you want to, you know, really ramp up your skill set, I think it's a good thing. As for freelance, I actually worked, like, I took my break and I learned PHP, and I worked freelance for a while before I started getting back into working for companies. And I don't know, I think that's a really good opportunity to, you know, it's nice to be your own boss. You just have to know that it involves a lot more skill sets than just development. Like, I did freelance for a little while, and then I stopped doing freelance because I'm not the best manager. And when a client would come to me and say, oh, well, we need to change this, and I want to add this on, you have to be able to determine how much more to charge them, and be able to tell them, hey, you need to pay me more money, and then deal with it when they complain. So, yeah.
Cool. Other questions?
Does it surprise you that William's kind of entering the whole software engineering thing? Like thinking back on like what you remember William in high school?
I guess I was a little surprised to know that you're going into this, just because, you know, I was used to seeing you posting like all your photos on Facebook.
I was bad at the freelance part too. So,
Yeah, I think it takes a certain type of person to
Yeah.
do freelance well, but if you're that type of person, like, you can have a lot of fun and make a lot of money. Like, I know people who drew Drupal freelance, and it can be really easy and really fast to put together a Drupal site if you have like control. And so for the right type of person, freelance is awesome. I'm just not that person. But you know what, I don't think it's that uncommon. Like, how long were you in journalism?
10 years.
10 years.
Yes.
You know, that's not that strange, career change. Like, I feel like if, I don't know, I'm surprised when somebody's in the same career for like 5 years these days, just because people just change really quickly.
All right, last question. Would you rather fight a shark-sized seahorse or 10 seahorse-sized sharks?
Well, a shark-sized seahorse, probably. It wouldn't fight me. I would just catch it and just ride it around. It'd be amazing.
Awesome. On that note, thank you for coming out. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.